Welcome to Philly Coca Presents Side Project Spotlight, episode 32. This is a developer's journey to making cool stuff. I'm Steve, and Philly Coca is a Philadelphia-based Coca Heads community focused on Apple development that primarily, but not exclusively, means iOS, Mac, tvOS, and watchOS development. Philly Coca's true desire is to take you higher on your own developer journey. So there we go. That was my first intro. I hope I did it okay, Cutthroat. This will be the final episode of 2022. We will be taking the remainder of the year off, and we're going to return with a new episode on January 16th, 2023. So if you haven't caught up on our past episodes, now's a great time to visit the back catalog. So last time, on Side Project Spotlight, Kotaro provided a retrospective on the podcast and Philly Coca. So for this final episode of the year, I wanted to talk a little bit about my personal journey transitioning to SwiftUI over the last year. Today, I would say I am fully on board with the Swift and SwiftUI bandwagon. But back in January 2022, I was definitely still in the transition stage. We had just launched the Kanji Love app here on the podcast. And at the day job, I was still primarily in Objective-C land with UIKit. Honestly, I am still primarily in Objective-C UIKit. That's what happens when you have a legacy app you're also updating. But we'll get to that. So Kanji Love back then was my first real app that I worked on. It was all Swift and all SwiftUI. And we had our challenges with it, which you can hear about if you go in the back catalog. But it was a pretty simple, straightforward watchOS app. But even so, I started the year still kind of uneasy with SwiftUI. And I was having trouble shifting my mental model, I guess, from the UIKit land, which is much more events-based. You create buttons and UI elements. You put them on the screen where you want them to be, and then somebody clicks them or does an action, and you get an event, and then you react to that event. But that's contrast with a more React style model of SwiftUI, with the more declarative UI syntax, where you kind of just lay out. It's almost like laying it out in like vagueness and vague ways. You're not really, but there's a lot of under the hood assumptions being made by the framework. Like when you say I want something in a V stack, it's like I want things in a vertical stack, but then that comes with its own set of defaults, which you can override. But there's a lot of that kind of deciding some of the details for you out of the box in SwiftUI, and then the fact that different changes in the model in SwiftUI cause the UI to be regenerated. So it's very different than handling all the state that you have to handle in UIKit land. So switching my mental model there, it's been a little challenging. And the Kanji Love app was helpful, but not enough. So for much of the first half of the year, this remained pretty much the same. I mean, at the day job, I was doing a lot of things that were not directly on the app. And so when I did even have to go on the app, it was still minor stuff in, again, the Objective-C, UIKit land. And so it stayed pretty much the same. But then WWDC came along. And I think this is when the real turning point started for me. Because up until this point, SwiftUI is nice. SwiftUI I played around with different times. But it always had some real severe limitations and quality of life problems around the kind of basic things. But iOS 16, the SwiftUI updates that came out with that, especially things like navigation stack, navigation split view, SwiftUI charts, the presentation detents modifier for resizable bottom sheets, Grid API, which I forgot about till I was reminding myself what stuff came out in June, and so much more, I would say, quality of life improvements that were released with 16 made me feel like, hey, now maybe SwiftUI is finally production ready, quote unquote. So I was really excited, looking forward to trying this stuff out. you can hear that we were excited on the podcast too about a lot of these updates. And I was especially excited about the navigation improvements because that's one of the things that was a big pain point, I think, in SwiftUI. And one of the things that kind of held me back from doing a lot with it for like a full-blown app because the kind of stuff I worked on now, there's a lot of navigation. Also we found out deep linking was difficult to do with the Kanji Love app. So I haven't done too much with the new navigation stack, but so far it looks good. It looks like it's a lot more flexible, if, by necessity being a bit more complicated than what we had before. And I like a lot of the quality of life improvements in SwiftUI, like the little changes to modifiers and the ability to I think add some more customizability to some of them. I can't even list them all, but I just find that doing things in SwiftUI targeting iOS 16 just feels like there's a lot less friction. And the entire environment, when targeting iOS 16 especially, just feels much more productive for a lot of like the typical kinds of use cases you would have. You want to do the standard kind of iOS stuff. You're not doing anything crazy custom. So that was really the first big thing. That was the big turning point for me. And so in the summer and into the fall, I started playing around with these new APIs. At the day job, I created just an Xcode project just to mess around with this stuff in, which was really cool. It just gave me a little playground. I mean, I guess I could have used Playground, the app, but I actually made a project. And I also started building a component. It was targeting iOS 15 out of necessity, but still. I was building a component to actually integrate into my existing UIKit Objective-C app, and I found a lot of success doing that. And this was another real big turning point, because not only now do I theoretically think that SwiftUI might be ready for me to use in prime time, but I had actual working code, and I was able to build this little UI component far, far more quickly, almost trivially, in SwiftUI versus if I had to do it in the UIKit land. Even integrating it into my Objective-C code base was a lot more straightforward than I thought it was going to be. In fact, that was the part of the development process that took the longest, and not because of a lack of support from Apple to do the integration, but because of the custom code that I have in the app that I had to figure out how to integrate this stuff into. So it was more like past Steve's fault that it was harder to integrate than Apple or SwiftUI by its nature. But even so, being able to build something very quickly using a SwiftUI, Swift workflow, and previews, and then integrate that into a really old code base, that was just a huge moment for me, because I thought I was going to have to spend hours and hours and hours trying to figure out how to do something in UIKit and connect everything together, and it's and I didn't have to, so that was great. And speaking of previews, this is another thing that it's really grown on me, and is one of the primary reasons workflow wise that I want to be in SwiftUI and Swift, because in my experience trying to build a UI using previews, it's just so much more productive than the old way of building something and then like launching the simulator to see if it worked, especially because I never really got into the storyboards, way of life. So I still had a lot of zip files and a lot of code layout, layout code in Objective-C and then some storyboards. But no matter what you use, you basically had to run the thing in the simulator to see if everything worked out. And that's also really annoying when the thing you're working on might be buried in the app. So you have to like launch the app and then navigate down to it. I know there's other ways of doing this, but that was often what would just happen. Like I need to fix something on this one screen. The easiest thing to do is just try to fix it and then run the simulator and see if it worked. And that's just a little slow, even though it's fast as far as simulators go. Launching it's a little slow, especially if you have to navigate down. But with previews, if you haven't experienced them, it'll really allow you to isolate the specific UI component that you're working on, and then you can have a preview that kind of integrates that component in something larger like a navigation stack or into a tab view, so you can see how it works with the larger shape of the app, and you can pin the previews so you can move between different UI files, SwiftUI files, and see exactly what it is you want to see and switch between the different types of views you want to see. And behind the scenes is basically running a simulator, but it's just much faster. And it helps you isolate the UI, which is really huge when you're building it. And then it helps you see what it's like to integrate it. And the whole experience just has much less friction in it than doing it in UIKit would have for me. So it's really nice. And the thing that enables previews to be so useful is that I also got, I guess at the end of last year, I got an M1 Pro laptop for work. I think that's when I got it. Time doesn't mean much anymore, with like the last 3 years of craziness. But once I got that, and personally, once at the end of 2020, I guess I got an M1. When they first came out, I got the M1 MacBook Pro personally. And when I had access to Apple Silicon, it makes SwiftUI and previews and the whole workflow usable. Before that, I was using Intel machines, and not particularly new ones either. It was just too slow. So that was another reason why I wasn't really into it at the time before I had usable hardware. But when you have any Apple Silicon device, it makes SwiftUI and Swift the default choice. The workflow is just so much nicer. So I had this component coming along, and I had been doing some experimentation in SwiftUI with a little side, playground project. And it came time to try to do some new Greenfield app design. So I decided to see what I could do prototyping a new app design at the day job with a colleague doing the same thing on Android. And we wanted to see how far can we go just using like the cutting edge latest stuff. So that would be SwiftUI and Swift, iOS 16 target, and Android. I think it's like Jetpack and Kotlin and whatever crazy Android number is the latest one. So we both started doing that. And I was really impressed with how quickly I could iterate design ideas, and not just like in Sketch or XD, but in working code. So this is huge and very different from when last time I was doing Greenfield app development like this. And mostly it was a lot of prototyping or designing in some kind of like Sketch-like program. And doing a lot of that before we even got to any code, because it just took so long to try to implement the stuff in code. But now I feel like I just have no need much of the time to go to something like Sketch. It's just, if you're doing a design like I'm trying to do, which is using like more straightforward components, it's just faster for me to just write the SwiftUI layout code directly, see what it looks like, change things on the fly, like colors and fonts and drop shadows, spacing, all those kinds of things. It's just so easy and quick to make those modifications and just see what it looks like, add some scrolling, animations. I mean, like adding a scroll view is so trivial compared to sometimes when I was doing that in UIKit. Stuff like that. Things just work. Like when you're within the bounds of what the components were designed for. And that's what I would recommend with SwiftUI, is to start there, start working within the bounds, and then modifying them where they give you options to modify things. Like it's easy to change fonts, easy to change colors, easy to change spacing. See how far you can get with that kind of stuff. And it's just such a productive environment doing it this way than it was like 2 years ago, using UIKit, in my view. So that's been just huge for me last few months, just playing around and modifying stuff. So like my colleague and I will be doing things, like he'll be doing something and on his side, and he'll show me like a screenshot. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then I'll just go and make like my own kind of variation of that using SwiftUI. And then we'll look at each other's code, and it's remarkable how similar and different, but like a lot of it's kind of similar-ish. Like you can understand it. Whereas if I tried to show him my UIKit code, I don't think he'd understand what he was looking at because a lot of it's so customized anyway. And it's all in Objective-C, and nobody really understands Objective-C. It just looks like screen noise, I think, to most people. Just too many brackets. But it's been a really fun experience though. And the being able to collaborate between platforms. I think the evolution of SwiftUI and Swift, it actually makes it easier to collaborate with someone who's working on like the Android version, keeping things more or less in sync. We're not sharing code, but we're able to more directly translate each other's ideas and changes into the paradigm of the platform we're on. So they don't look exactly the same, but like they'll have the same kind of colors or the same kinds of layouts, but they'll be just a little bit different, so they both feel like they're at home on the platform. It's just so much faster to make those changes and do it. So instead of making some kind of sketch file and sharing that, but then not being sure how hard it would be to implement that concept on either platform, now we literally just implement it in our respective platforms' code, in my case, SwiftUI, and I can immediately tell you how hard or easy that is. Usually, so far, it's been pretty easy. And so that's a huge change, I think, and it's making collaboration much more fruitful, and it's less time spent trying to implement the thing and more time spent trying to discuss the pros and cons and get feedback, that kind of thing. So I think the biggest takeaway I have about going to SwiftUI and Swift is just the huge improvement in speed of productivity. So I mean, I remember in like UIKit, I'd spend hours trying to get auto layout to work right. And even with stuff like stack views to help you, I'd still be fiddling with stuff in storyboards and zip files and going back to Objective-C code and fixing the missing connections between the zip file, the storyboard, and the Objective-C code, and that would be causing a crash. And it was just tedious. And that's the word I keep coming back to when I think about using UIKit now versus SwiftUI. It's just tedious. And that probably has a lot to do with, of course, as I said multiple times this podcast, the legacy code base that I've been maintaining that I wrote, but it's now been so long that it's legacy. But the things I'm trying to implement now are generally well supported by the SwiftUI components, and that's something else I want to emphasize, that I'm sure that there are many problems, many edge cases, many pain points in SwiftUI, even today, even with the latest versions of it. And I will probably encounter some of them, but for the moment, I'm trying to color within the lines of the SwiftUI components that exist and the defaults that they give you, and just making modifications that are straightforward, that are accessible, like fonts and colors and spacing and that kind of thing, and just building relatively simple kinds of views. So your mileage may vary if you're going to do something more custom, but I'm finding it just super productive. I also necessarily, because as I said, I've been doing Objective-C for so long, I wasn't using Swift a lot until this last year. But that was because if you've ever had a lot of Objective-C custom and a lot of custom Objective-C classes doing things, it's not always very easy to integrate Swift. Every time I have in the past to integrate something, it's been painful, and sometimes I would just give up and re-implement it in Objective-C. But integrating SwiftUI views specifically has been a lot easier. As I said, the most difficult part I had with this component I've been working on is the custom stuff that I wrote and making it work within that. But the actually bringing in a SwiftUI view is pretty straightforward, So I like that a lot. So that means that I can prototype stuff in SwiftUI and bring it in, and that's very cool. And so it also leads me to want to use Swift more. Of course, you still have limitations when you're integrating between the two. So the most productive environment is when I'm doing all Swift for a brand new app. I don't have to worry about whether something is a proper class that'll work in both, or a proper type that'll work in both Objective-C and Swift, etc. But overall, I'll say Swift, the language, as I've been using it, it's nice. It's growing on me. I still think it's over-engineered a bit, has like too many features. But at least when working within SwiftUI, it's pretty straightforward to write clean Swift code now, which is nice. and the Xcode support, which was one of the problems I had with Swift for years, it just wasn't very good at whatever Apple calls IntelliSense. I'm used to IntelliSense and like Visual Studio, but the Xcode support for refactoring and providing you method names and parameters and stuff, it's just so much better now. I feel like it was just broken for so long, and it's not perfect. I still think Objective-C, it seems like it just works rock solid reliably, and Swift now is like almost there. So that's good. That makes the process actually usable for me. I remember a few years ago, trying to do Swift, and I was just like, I can't. Like, this is so painful. It was just all Xcode, not Swift's fault. So whatever Apple has been doing with the Xcode team there, good job, guys. It's so much better now. So I'll wrap things up here, I guess. I feel personally reinvigorated with Apple development, thanks to working with Kothra and Aaron on this podcast, playing around with the latest SwiftUI releases. And I'm not the great designer like Kothra is. I can use Photoshop and Sketch, and I think I understand color theory and information architecture and layout pretty well, but I'm no Kothra level designer. However, as I mentioned, I lean on the defaults of SwiftUI components, and that has been helping me make really nice designs that look way better than what I was able to accomplish with UIKit for far less effort. And that is like in a nutshell, why I am so on board with SwiftUI now, because it's given me the superpower that I didn't have before. It's living up to the promise of what computing should be. The ability to make your own tools and, make them well. And I can make them look good, and I can make them be functional. I can make them accessible, and I can make them, quickly and productively. And so that's why I'm on board with SwiftUI now. Now I have ideas for apps that I think I can actually implement in a reasonable amount of time. Whereas before I'd be like, nah, it's just too much to try to do that. Play around with that on a weekend. I won't get very far with that. But now it's like, why not? I can get really far with SwiftUI. Just prototyping a really simple UI. I find myself just opening Xcode and experimenting with ideas now, whereas before I might start with like a sketch file or something like that. Because it's just so easy to be like, okay, I want this thing on the screen here. I want this list of stuff. I want to put some fake data in here. It's all just very, very easy. I remember back in college, I guess it was a long time ago. I remember maybe even older than that. I remember, you would be talking about these developer systems. I don't remember what we called them, whatever, fourth generation, something like that. I don't remember. But we were talking about these systems, these hypothetical systems, or these attempts at making these systems where instead of writing lots of code, you would kind of describe to the computer what you wanted, and then it would just give it to you. I guess kind of like, not nearly as advanced, but like Chat GPT gives people this sense that they can just describe things and it'll just come up with the stuff, it was like that. It was like the idea is like, you could kind of design things visually. You could design things by kind of higher level language. Well, SwiftUI is that. SwiftUI is that dream come into reality in a real way. It's not exactly what was envisioned, but the ability to just kind of describe it. And I know Apple is not the inventor of this kind of concept, this type of language. I would say that Android has consistently had a lot more like easier to use layout tooling in a lot of ways than Apple has had for many years. But the fact that it's on Apple now, that's a platform I use. That's like what I like developing on. It's cool. It's like getting a superpower. So, especially if you're not a big designer, and anything that gives you that kind of that power to make something that works pretty well and looks pretty good and it can get in the hands of an end user quickly, whether that be yourself or somebody else, that's huge. That's huge. That means more apps can get developed, more problems can be solved, and then you can provide your own kinds of superpowers to the end users of your own products. And that's what I think software development is all about, at least app development. You're trying to create some software that's going to help a human being accomplish more, do something that he or she couldn't do before. It's the bicycle for the mind is what I think, was that Steve Jobs said that about what Macs or what computers are supposed to be, personal computers are supposed to be. And I always keep that in the forefront of my mind when I'm developing software, because that's what I want. I want to give you an ability or a superpower or something that you didn't have before. And now, we were well into this smartphone revolution. You can give people so many amazing abilities that they can carry around with them in their pockets and eventually maybe wear on their faces. We'll see how that works out. But if you have an app idea, it's just so much easier to prototype it now than it ever was before, in my opinion. So I hope you will take my little rambling discussion about my journey to heart. And if you haven't already played around with the latest Apple ecosystem, you should do so. There's Playgrounds on iPad, which is a great app. Makes it very easy to play around with stuff. It's also really fast. And just you can get the cheapest MacBook. It's just a great time to get into the Apple developer ecosystem. The cheapest Apple silicon hardware is better than most of what you could get in higher end 2019 Macs. I mean, not like the high end desktops, but the laptops for sure. And it's plenty fast for doing iOS development. However, I would recommend a 14-inch base if you can afford it. That's a really, really good laptop. But because the friction between ideation and prototyping is so much reduced now, it's just, I think, like a new kind of golden era potentially for app development after a period of time where it felt like it was getting a bit stagnant. So thanks for listening. That's all we have for today. You can learn more about Phillycoca at phillycoca.org. There you'll find links to our Slack, meetup schedule, and contact info. If you're feeling generous, please leave a review in Apple Podcasts and share us with all your developer friends. And one more thing. How many programmers does it take to change a light bulb? None. That's a hardware problem. It's a terrible, terrible joke. I think that might be the worst one we've ever done. Until next time, good luck on your own developer journey. We will cheer for you always. I'm no Kotaro level designer.